There are men who carry a revolver because they want trouble to notice them, and there are men who carry one because trouble already knows their name. New Mexico Territory, 1884. A silver dollar spun beneath the lamps of the Red Butte saloon, while Gabe Stone stood with me, soaking through his coat, and 3 men watching his hands. If he made one wrong move, he could die before the coin touched the floor. If he never reached Finn Mesa Ranch, Laura Finn could lose far more than 11 missing cattle. The coin climbed. Wes Crow watched Gabe with a grin that had gone thin around the edges. Cal Pike and Roy Dunn stood behind him, less certain than they had been in a minute before. Ichabel kept both hands flat on the bar. Gabe did not reach for his gun. That was what unsettled them. The revolver at his hip was gray with wear, its grips darkened by years of sweat and weather. It looked tired. So did the man wearing it. But tired men were supposed to look away when younger men laughed at them. Gabe did not. 3 hours earlier, he had ridden into Red Butte for one quiet drink and a job. Laura Finn, 36, was waiting at Finn Mesa Ranch. 11 head of her cattle had vanished into the red country beyond town, and every missing animal meant less money, less winter feed, and another reason for people to wonder whether she could hold what belonged to her. Gabe had been hired to find the trail. Nothing more. He tied his horse outside the saloon, stepped through the swinging doors, and took the last stool at the bar. The room smelled of tobacco, whiskey, hot wood, and dust. A piano stumbled through a lively tune. Cards slapped tabletops. At the center of it all, Wes Crow was putting on a show. Roy tossed a whiskey glass into the air. Wes drew. The shot cracked. Glass burst above the floorboards. The room cheered. Another glass went up. Then another. Each throw rose higher than the last. Gabe kept his eyes on his drink until Roy threw one. Still half full, Wes fired. The glass exploded. Whiskey and glittering shards swept across the room and struck Gabe out across the chest. The cheering stopped. Gabe looked down at the wet cloth. Then he raised his eyes to Wes. He said nothing. Wes gave a crooked smile and rested his hand near his holster. "Something wrong, old man?" Gabe slowly set his whiskey on the bar, and somewhere behind Wes's smile, the first trace of fear appeared. Gabe Stone had learned long ago that silence could save a man trouble. So when Wes Crow asked if something was wrong, Gabe gave him one last chance to let the matter die. He lifted a hand and brushed a sliver of glass from his coat. Whiskey darkened the cloth from shoulder to waist. Nothing that won't dry. A few men near the card tables laughed carefully. Wes did not. High had been the center of the room for most of the afternoon, and Gabe's refusal to be impressed seemed to trouble him more than anger would have. Cal Pike leaned against a table with a grin. Roy Dunn watched from beside him, younger and less certain now that the room had gone quiet. Gabe turned back toward his drink. That should have ended it. Outside, the wind pushed red dust along the boardwalk. Beyond Red Butte, the land opened into dry mesas and shallow arroyos, where 11 head of Laura Finn's cattle had vanished. Gabe had seen the tracks before coming into town, enough to know they had not simply wandered through a broken fence. Someone had moved them. He wanted to finish his whiskey, meet Laura, follow the trail, collect his pay, and keep riding when the work was done. Simple work. At least it had been that morning. Behind him, Wes laughed again. "You carry that old thing for decoration?" Gabe glanced down at the revolver on his hip. Its finish had faded years ago. The grips were worn smooth, where his palm had closed around them too many times. Nothing about it looked impressive. Gabe preferred it that way. Cal chuckled. "Bet it couldn't hit a barn from 10 feet. The room waited. Gabe could feel every eye without looking at any of them. He could also feel the weight of the afternoon slipping away. Laura Finn was waiting at a ranch with missing cattle, and no reason to care about the pride of 3 young men in a saloon. Gabe picked up his glass. Then Wes spoke again. "Unless the old man wants to prove us wrong." Gabe stopped before the whiskey reached his mouth. For a moment, only the piano could be heard. Then even that went quiet. Gabe set the glass down. He reached into his pocket, placed a silver dollar on the bar, and pushed it toward Wes. "Toss it." Wes's smile returned. Ichabel's disappeared. Wes Crow looked at the silver dollar on the bar, as if Gabe had just handed him a joke He had not yet decided how to tell. Then he picked it up. The coin flashed between his fingers. "You want me to throw this?" Gabe lifted his whiskey. "That's what I said." Cal Pike laughed from behind Wes. Roy Dunn joined him, but his eyes stayed on Gabe. Something in the older man's stillness had changed the room. Not much, just enough. The card players had stopped pretending not to listen. Ike Bell stood beneath the shelves of bottles with his jaw set tight. Outside, wind pushed dust against the saloon doors and made them tremble in their frame. Wes held the coin up. "You planning to shoot it with that relic?" His eyes dropped to Gabe's revolver. The metal was dull from years of sweat, rain, trail dust, and handling. There was nothing decorative about it. Gabe looked at the gun once, then back at Wes. "If it's as bad as you think, you've got nothing to worry about." That drew another laugh. This time the room did not join in. Gabe finished what remained in his glass and set it down. He should have walked out. Laura Finn was waiting. 11 cattle were still somewhere beyond Red Butte, and every hour of daylight mattered if the tracks crossed hard ground before sunset. I knew that. He also knew something else. Men like Wes Crow rarely stopped when a room rewarded them for going farther. Wes stepped away from the bar. The crowd opened around him. Cal moved toward one wall. Roy took the other. Gabe remained where he was. "You miss," Wes said. "The dollar's mine." Gabe gave a small nod. "And if I don't?" Wes smiled. "Then maybe I'll start believing that old gun can still speak." Gabe's eyes settled on him. It never forgot how. The smile on Wes's face weakened, only for a second. Then he tossed the coin. It rose through the yellow lamplight. Every sound in the saloon seemed to fall away. No cards, no boots, no piano, only the faint turn of silver in the air. Gabe's hand moved. The revolver cleared leather without flourish or wasted motion. The shot struck the room like a hammer. The silver dollar snapped sideways and hit the floorboards near Wes's boot. For several seconds, nobody moved. Wes bent slowly and picked it up. There was a clean hole through its center. He stared at the coin, then at Gabe. Lucky shot. Gabe holstered the revolver. Could be. And that was when Wes Crow made his second mistake. High tossed the coin back. Again. The second silver dollar went higher than the first. Cal Pike threw it this time. High gave the coin a hard twist with his thumb before sending it toward the rafters, making the silver flash unevenly through the smoky light. Gabe watched its rise. His revolver came up. One shot. The coin struck the wall and dropped behind an empty chair. Roy Dunn found it. Another hole. Through the center. Nobody laughed. Wes took the coin from Roy and rubbed his thumb across the fresh edge of the lead mark. His face had changed. The confidence was still there, but it had become work, something he now had to hold in place. "Again," he said. Gabe looked toward the windows. The afternoon light had begun to soften. Every minute spent inside the saloon was another minute. Laura Finn waited at Finn Mesa Ranch. He could picture the dry country beyond town. Red ridges, juniper, dust, settling. Inside cattle tracks, evidence disappearing beneath wind and hoof traffic. He should have stopped. Instead, Gabe turned back toward Wes. One more. Wes smiled, as though he had won something already. Roy tossed the third coin. Higher, faster, with more spin. Gabe fired. The dollar dropped hard against the floorboards and rolled in a widening circle until it fell flat beside Ike Bell's boots. Ike did not pick it up. He only looked at Wes. That look said what nobody else wanted to say aloud. Enough. Wes ignored it. Money began appearing on the nearest table. Small bills, coins. A few men placed wagers without speaking. What had started as entertainment now carried a different weight. The crowd no longer watched to see whether Gabe could hit the silver. They watched to see whether he would finally miss. Fourth coin. Hitty. Fifth. Hitty. By the sixth, Gabe had stopped returning to his stool between shots. He simply reloaded with the same measured movements, waited for the next throw, and fired. No grin, no boast, no satisfaction. That unsettled Wes. Losing money. A man could hate someone who humiliated him. It was harder to hate a man who seemed almost unwilling to notice he was doing it. By the eighth round, Cal's smile had disappeared. Roy stood with his arms folded, no longer eager to touch the coins. Ike remained behind the bar, watching Gabe with the expression of a man who had finally understood that speed was not the dangerous part. It was certainty. Gabe glanced once toward the door. He could still leave. Wes saw the look. "You walking away?" Gabe turned back. "No." Wes reached into his pocket and placed another silver dollar on the table, but this time, his hand was shaking. Wes kept his hand on the silver dollar until the shaking stopped. Then he slid it toward Cal. Ninth. Cal did not reach for it at first. The room had changed around them. An hour earlier, men had shouted over cards and whiskey, eager to see glass break in the air. Now nobody seemed interested in being entertained. They were watching a man lose something he could not afford to lose in public. Cal finally picked up the coin and tossed it. Gabe fired. The dollar struck a post and dropped to the floor. Another clean hole. The 10th followed. Then the 11th. Each shot sounded louder because the room grew quieter after it. Gabe's winnings gathered on the nearest table, but he barely looked at them. He checked the cylinder, fed in fresh cartridges, and waited. Wes watched every movement. There was no swagger left in his face now, only calculation. And underneath it, something meaner. Gabe recognized that look. A man could lose money and earn it back. He could lose a wager and laugh about it later. But a man who had built his name on being feared could not easily survive a room discovering that somebody else was faster. Ichabel leaned forward behind the bar. "That's enough shooting for one afternoon." Wes ignored him. High took the last silver dollar himself. 12th. Gabe's gaze went to the window. The light outside had turned lower and redder. Laura Finn had already waited longer than she should have. 11 cattle were still missing. The trail was cooling, while grown men measured their pride in silver and gun smoke. Gabe could have walked away. For one breath, he almost did. Then Wes tossed the coin. It climbed high enough to catch the last hard stripe of sunlight through the window. Gabe drew. One shot. The silver dollar spun away and struck the floor. Wes bent to retrieve it. His thumb found the hole before his eyes did. No one cheered. No one laughed. He looked around the saloon and saw what Gabe had already understood. The room was no longer his. "We're done," Wes said. Gabe holstered his revolver. "Your bet." The words were quiet. That made them worse. Wes shoved the remaining money across the table. Gabe gathered it, counted a portion, and placed it before Ichabel. For the glass. Then he turned away from Wes Crow. Behind him, a chair creaked. Leather whispered against leather, and Gabe's hand stopped halfway to his whiskey. Gabe knew the sound before he turned. Leather pulling tight around steel. A revolver leaving a holster behind a man's back. There was no time to wonder whether Wes Crow meant to frighten him. No time to ask whether pride had finally become murder. Gabe moved. His boots turned on the worn floorboards as his right hand dropped. The old revolver cleared leather. Wes had his gun halfway out. For one suspended instant, the two men saw each other clearly. Wes's face held anger first, then surprise. Gabe fired once. The shot struck hard through the saloon. Wes staggered and went down beside the table, where the silver dollars still lay scattered. His revolver hit the boards a moment later. Silence returned so completely that Gabe could hear the faint roll of one coin before it settled flat. Cal Pike froze near the wall. Roy Dunn had gone pale. Neither man reached for his gun. Gabe kept his revolver low for another second, watching their hands. Then he holstered it. There was no triumph in the motion, no smile, no word for Wes, only a tired breath through his nose, as if something he had spent years avoiding had found him anyway. Ichabel stared from behind the bar. Gabe looked at the broken glass, the overturned chair, and the mound on the floor. Then he counted more money from his winnings and placed it beside what he had already left for Ike. For the trouble. Ike gave a slow nod. That was his choice. Gabe looked at Wes. Still had a price. He'd returned to the end of the bar. His whiskey was where he had left it. He drank the last mouthful without hurry, though it no longer tasted like anything. Outside, evening had begun to settle over Red Butte. The Mises held the last red light. Wind carried dust along the street. Somewhere beyond them stood Finn Mesa Ranch. Laura Finn was still waiting. Gabe could leave town now. Nobody in that saloon would have stopped him. He could ride south before dark, put Red Butte behind him, and let somebody else worry about 11 stolen cattle. For years, leaving had been the simplest answer after Gunsmoke. He picked up his hat. Cal moved aside before Gabe came near him. Roy would not meet his eyes. At the swinging doors, Gabe paused, not because of Wes, because of a promise made before any of this happened. Then he stepped outside, untied his horse, and turned toward Finn Mesa instead of the open road. For the first time that day, the harder choice had nothing to do with a gun. By the time Gabe reached Finn Mesa Ranch, the last light had gone copper along the red bluffs. Laura Finn was waiting beside the corral gate. She was 36. Sleeves rolled past her wrists, dust on her skirt, and one hand resting on the top rail, as if she had been standing there long enough to stop expecting good news. Her eyes went first to Gabe, then to the dark stain across his coat. "You're late." "I know." She looked at the revolver on his hip, then back at his face. "Trouble?" Gabe dismounted. "Enough of it." Laura did not ask for the story. That was the first thing he respected about her. She led him past the corral, toward the open ground beyond the ranch buildings, where the last cattle tracks showed faintly in the hard soil. 11 head, she said. "They were here yesterday morning." Gabe crouched and studied the marks. Laura pointed toward a break in the dust. "They didn't scatter." "No." Fence wasn't cut either. Gabe ran 2 fingers along a hoof print, pressed deeper than the others. Someone kept them bunched. Laura's jaw tightened. The missing cattle were not just animals with a price attached. They were winter feed bought, wages paid, breeding stock kept alive, and proof that Finn Mesa could still hold what belonged to it. On a small ranch, losing 11 head once was expensive. Letting people believe they could take 11 without consequence was worse. Gabe rose. "Tracks run southwest." "I know." That made him look at her. Laura met his eyes without apology. "I followed them until the ground turned rock hard." "You went alone?" "I own the cattle." There was no challenge in her voice, only fact. Gabe glanced toward the darkening country beyond the ranch. He had expected a woman waiting for a tracker to solve her problem. Instead, he found someone who had already done half the work. "We leave at first light," he said. Laura shook her head. "We leave when you're ready." Gabe looked at the fading tracks, then at the horse he had ridden from Red Butte. I was tired. His coat still smelled faintly of whiskey and gun smoke. For years, that had been reason enough to keep moving. Tonight, it was not. "Give me 10 minutes. Laura gave one short nod. As she turned towards the tack shed, Gabe noticed something else in the dirt beyond the last hoofprints. A second set of tracks. Boots. Someone had been walking beside the cattle, and they had not been in any hurry. They found the first clear sign after sunrise. A narrow arroyo, opened between 2 low ridges, protected from the wind, and the dust there had held what the harder ground had hidden. 11 cattle, 2 horses, boot prints beside them. Laura knelt near one track and touched the edge without disturbing it. "Still mine." Gabe looked at her. "You can tell from that?" "I can tell from the cattle." A few strands of hair clung to a thorn bush where one animal had brushed past. Laura pulled them free, studied them, and let them fall. "They're being moved slow." Gabe nodded. "That means whoever took them doesn't want to run weight off before they sell." It was the first thing they had agreed on without argument. By noon, Red Butte had disappeared behind them. The country narrowed into red stone, juniper, dry washes, and long stretches where the trail seemed to vanish entirely. Gabe rid broken crust in the earth. Laura rid the herd, a place where the cattle had crowded for water. A patch of trampled grass, where one animal had resisted turning. A smear on a rock she recognized from a steer with a damaged horn. Neither needed to explain much. They worked better when they didn't. On the second evening, Gabe repaired a loose strap on Laura's saddle while she divided what remained in their water bags. She handed him his share. "You could have left after Red Butte." Gabe's hands stopped on the leather. "So you heard. News travels faster than cattle." He tightened the strap, usually less accurately. Laura waited. When he offered nothing more, she did not press. That silence stayed with him longer than a question would have. By the third morning, Gabe had stopped thinking of the job as 11 animals and a payment waiting at the end. He watched the ridge lines more carefully when Laura crossed open ground. He checked the trail behind them twice, not because she asked, because somebody ahead had already decided Finn Mesa was easy to steal from. Near midday, Laura raised a hand. Gabe stopped. Below them, a dry creek bed cut through the pale earth. Fresh hoof prints covered the bottom. Alongside them were 2 sets of boot tracks. Then came the sound. Faint, a cow calling somewhere beyond the bend. Laura's face changed. She knew that voice. Gabe eased his horse back from the ridge. "We found them." Laura looked toward the creek. "No." Her hand settled near the saddle horn. "We found whoever has them." Gabe and Laura left their horses below the ridge and moved forward on foot. The dry creek bent between 2 walls of pale earth, deep enough to hide cattle from anyone riding the open country. They heard the herd before they saw it. Hooves shifting over stone. A low complaint from one steer. The dull knock of horn against horn. Laura eased to the edge and looked down. All 11 were there, dusty and thirsty but alive. 2 men sat their horses beyond the herd, keeping the cattle moving south in no particular hurry. Farther ahead, a wagon track cut toward country, where a buyer could take possession without asking how the brands had changed hands. Laura studied the animals one by one. "That red steer is mine." Gabe followed her eyes. "The one with the split horn?" She nodded. "And the black cow beside him. She throws her right hip when she walks." There was no doubt in her voice. This was not a story Gabe could settle for her. It was her herd. Her name burned into the brands. Her decision. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Laura looked at the 2 riders. "Take them home." One of the men finally noticed movement along the ridge. His hand went toward his belt. Gabe stepped into view before Laura could. Not fast. Not threatening. Just visible. Those cattle belonged to Finn Mesa. The rider stared at him. Then at the revolver on his hip. Something passed across the man's face. Recognition, perhaps. News from Red Butte had traveled ahead of them, after all. Laura came down beside Gabe. "You heard him." The second rider looked at her. "Lady, you ought to let men handle this." Laura's expression did not change. "I have been." She walked toward the nearest steer and turned it with the pressure of her body and a low call it recognized. The animal moved. Then another followed. The herd began to bend back toward Finn Mesa. No shot was fired. That did not make the moment gentle. Gabe stayed between Laura and the 2 riders until the last animal had turned north. Only then did he step backward. The men let them go, perhaps because they knew the cattle were stolen, perhaps because they had heard what happened to Wes Crow. Either way, Laura did not thank Gabe for saving her ranch. I had not. He had only made room for her to take back what was hers. And as the herd started home, Gabe realized he was no longer thinking about when he would leave. "I was thinking about getting her there alive." They brought the cattle back to Finn Mesa under a sky gone pale with evening. By the time the last steer passed through the gate, dust covered Gabe's coat, Laura's skirt, the horses, and every piece of tack they had touched for 3 days. Laura shut the gate herself. Then she stood with both hands on the top rail and watched the herd settle. 11 head, all back. It should have felt like victory. Instead, the ranch seemed unusually quiet. A windmill creaked somewhere beyond the barn. Leather straps tapped softly against a saddle hanging by the fence. Gabe could still hear the shot in the Red Butte saloon if he let the silence deepen enough. Wes Crow was dead. No amount of recovered cattle changed that. Laura looked toward him. "You kept your word." Gabe shrugged. "Job wasn't finished. It is now." That landed harder than she intended. Gabe glanced toward his horse. The saddle was still on. His bedroll was tied behind it. Everything he owned that mattered could be carried away before dark. For years, that had been the comfort of it. No fence could hold him. No town could claim him. No one had to wonder whether he would come back. Laura stepped away from the corral. "I can pay you in the morning. You can pay me now." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Gabe almost smiled. "Not because I'm leaving." The words surprised them both. Laura said nothing. She had learned that silence sometimes gave him more room than questions. Gabe walked to his horse and rested one hand on the saddle horn. Beyond Finn Mesa, the road ran toward Red Butte, and then farther south through country that did not ask a man to stay. He had taken that road in one form or another most of his life. This time, he looked back. Laura was checking the returned cattle, one by one, as though counting them. With her own eyes mattered more than any tally written on paper. It probably did. Gabe loosened the cinch. The horse shifted beneath his hand. Laura heard the buckle and turned. "You staying the night?" Gabe pulled the saddle free. For tonight. Nothing more was promised. Nothing more was needed. The ranch had its cattle back. Laura still had work waiting at dawn. Gabe still carried an old revolver and memories he had not learned how to put down. But when the sun disappeared behind the red mesa, his horse stood unsaddled beside Finn Mesa's fence. For the first time in years, leaving was no longer the easiest thing he knew how to do. Thank you for riding this trail with Gabe and Laura to the end. Sometimes the hardest choice is not facing danger, but deciding whether to stay when every old instinct tells you to leave. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more tales of love, survival, justice, and second chances from the American frontier. And tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Gabe after what happened in Red Butte, or would you have watched him ride away? Until the next trail. Take care and ride safe. Disclaimer: this is a fictional Western romance story inspired by life on the 19th century American frontier. Characters, events, dialogue, and dramatic situations are created for storytelling purposes. Historical settings and cultural details are researched for authenticity.